And the reason why that's happening is because you're modifying the real true source comes since that position of operation itself. True resonance is all from inside setting. It's already in construct. It's already in design. It's already assigned its own system. But the highest levels that you guys can reach is just coming into the existing, because you already identified who you already are as to who I am, about what I've always been. It's that position of operation itself. So track and communication, you guys got your test reviews and evaluations and settings. Travels and point graphs on Thursday. Preparation on Friday to your test. Okay, so we're just going to go more into the story itself. Feel free to connect with all of Zazera if you want to get in position of the portal of 1-1 and set lines of travel and calculation 1 setting sequence. It's all process at position lines of direct centers and grounds lines of sequence. This puts platitudes and operation lines of setting into travel. This high lines as force. And basically understanding if I'm 100% of astral projection, it's much easier to go through travel through portals, right? If I'm 96%, right? What's that position? That's 4 under pi. Okay, so that's 4 under. Okay, process lines, setting lines of direct centers, ground centers, lines of sequence. Platitude line course centers, directing lines of 6 and measured into over lines of pi, 80 and set lines of signals. Process lines of time for line centers. Puts position lines of high course centers, time set lines of flux, triangulation over 3, over 6, over 9, and 12, and 24 lines of setting interaction. Okay? So what you have to try to understand, 96% is 4% less of 100%. 95 is 5%. So every time you go low, what happens to the percentage of the brain level capacity of your astral projection yourself, your story that you put yourself into through modifications? It defeats the purpose in yourself. So you lose tractions, you lose locations, you lose yourself, you lose identity of yourself, you lose all operation of your system and operation to a cycle. So it's important that you stay above 100% time frame and formats that put you in your reality, that put you into the existing of the affirmation system, to the emptiness. Empty, okay, is just existing to the mind, okay, to the processing of what you're projecting, okay, to your temperature readings of you or teleportation of your system. Empty. EMPTY. Ness is just the networking to existing of 2 systematic lines of travel. Emptiness. But it all travels all in one, right? So staying 100% a timeline, it keeps you into 144 flux above the system of the blows of travel. But there's no equal lines of separation, okay? So how you see above is how you see below, okay? That defines you and how you see triangulation box. So all I'm doing is creating stories around that, but I'm going through stories, but never at the same story, because my metric, my meters, my scale, and my position, my astral projections is always changing travels of recognition time frame. But it's always going through a story, always going through other stories, more stories, other line rotation of stories, overriding sequence of stories and travel. But it's a constant continuous flow that keeps expanding itself through stories, telling a story, operating yourself through a story. Everything is a story itself, but you're always in the levels of the emptiness, but you're always in the center of the emptiness. That's what's even more crazy. The brain is knowing exactly where you are because you have full alignments in your system of travel. So 4 setting in sequence. Bounce communication to grounds, bounce lines, operation lines of center, into the set position of its atmospheres, into its highways and travel of galaxy alignment. But everything travels on its own system, right? So if everything travels on its own system, it's creating its own levels of its own story. It's creating its own programming. It's creating its own objective. It's creating its own system. It records everything of its own system. So when you're talking to anything, it's recording everything. So it can pick up its archives, so it can pick up your frequencies, so it can get you in position lines of balance. It has its own thinking operation system that travels its process calculation, now uses its own apparatus to its breathing mechanism lines position. That's right, a coffee cup can breathe. See, that's what you don't identify. If you are conscious of everything, so is everything else of its own operation. If you run your own operation system through film chip, so does it also runs its own operation of its systems. If you run your own operation of its programming, so does everything else through a coffee cup. And that's what you have to start identifying. It's all levels of its own operation system through attraction. So you're traveling through stories through attraction. Yourself telling the operation, readjusting you, the story that you go through. All right? Now, understanding direct is understanding redirect, right? So you go through the Y screen into the systematical of telling the operation a readjusting in your system interactions. And you can do a double line Y that processes the storylines of screen. See? Direct and redirect. Okay, so that's the converting system. So we're going to go through storyline, directing ground centers, equilibrium lines of platforms over at Q, process line core centers, Q over lines, R line rotations, travels, position point box lines frames, triangulation lines, circulation line grounds, Y screen into flux, process lines of 3 weather patterns, in position lines of percentage, in brain capacity over lines, 100% time frame, in percentage of astral projection of myself. It's all a story I'm doing. Everything's a story. But I'm going through stories. That keeps me into settings. Now, if I want to be on standby and stay in one story, you understand how to modify that. That means you got to box everything in frequency and time formats. That's the 3-5 convergence in a trifactor. Okay, locked in the story, but it has to be the same frequency, same level, same embedding system. 4 settings, 6 lines of travel and track communication, right? Convert this system to lines of balance. Now, the balance lines, the equilibrium stays positioned 100%. It doesn't go to 102, doesn't go to 106, because it's locked in 3 panels, 3 activations, 3 processing, and direct lines of grounds, and set calculation, right? 4 all line centers on sequence on communication with platforms in plateau. Locked in frame and position, still in 100% time frame, right? Which means you're going through that triangulation and positions to its bedding system into the film strip that you set up and design that puts you in all levels of operation system, all through track location. Okay? So that's how you stay in one costume and one design, all right? You lock yourself in the past, present, future. That processes you in the center that puts you in the future of adaptation of everything that you process through. Remember, center is just the emptiness of expanding yourself. That's what center means, guys. But you're always in the center of expanding. But what you get very confused is your imagination, so how to adapt that. So again, so above 50%, you're good to go, right? Anything above, you're at 60%, you're at 70%, 80%, okay? So it depends if you're fatigued or tired. Everything around you is going to be fatigued and tired. Right away. If you're angry, everything's angry because you're connected to everything, everything's connected to you. So it affects your Wi-Fi, it affects your phone, it affects your TV. Okay, if you're tired, everything's tired. That's how balanced you are. That's how connected you are through wire circuits to the core that units the system into electrical lines of current. It's a current flow that has one connection that connects to everything all at once. So you modify your frequencies, everything modifies you in frequency. Okay, you change the coloration, everything's changed the coloration. You're all connected to each other, but you're also connected to everything through attraction. And that's how you modify everything. Now, if you're chasing 50%, okay, you're chasing 50%, what are you doing? You're adding story frames of fabrication. Okay, what is that doing to the 50%? Okay, what is that doing to the 50%? Underscore 50. Okay, so that's an overdraft right away. And remember, you're trying to understand yourself through astral projection of your memory. That's just no memory that you already are. That puts you in position. So you're underscore 50%. That means you're going to go to 49, 48, all the way back to 0. A percent in set of operation lines is set position of operation. Okay, but it all travels all together, all in one. So I'm just trying to get you to understand how you come into the flux. Time capacitor, body capacitor settings, all through set position as capacity. Okay, because that's what you have to constantly look at, is the flux capacitor. It puts time formats, how fast you're going in your brain capacity of itself. Okay, that puts everything all together, how you see it in position of 50% above or 50% below. Sorry, 50% below, you're underscore 50. you're overdrafting 50 through your body now. So everything you're manifesting will be liquidized in set position, back in solid, back in confusion, back in operation lines of distraught, back in mind of separation, back in story. And that's what you not want to do. Right? So if you don't think you can put yourself back in story, think again. And that's what you do not want to do. You all want to stay 50% above. You always want to stay 144 flux. Okay, 50% of the brain, 144 flux in time. Okay, anything below that, you're 40%, well, you're 10% below, right? So it's just trying to understand the connections of the prime numbers, the odds and the even, right? Knowing exactly 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, okay? Okay, you see that as odd, right? And then you got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. All right, now it's not odd, it's not even until you codify it. But to codify, you have to understand how to communicate to its own system, of its own operation, of its own setting, because it has its own name, has its own template, has its own frequency, of its own set position, of its own operation, of its own concept, its own awareness. It knows what it is through its own navigation system. It goes through a story. It travels through a story. It doesn't connect to one story. It doesn't frame its position in one costume, one design. But it's constantly going through stories. Okay, so 1 line signals, 3 lines of ground, 5 lines set position, 7 line operation lines of 9. Codify it, balanced communication setting. There it is. Now I see it as even. See, 1, 3, 5 is not odd. That's where you got to get out of. See, you're so focused on everything you don't identify. And that's why you can't get in configuration of balance of your imaginations, because you're copying everybody else. Sorry, that's plagiarism. All right, so directing ground centers lines of sequence, the plotted 2 lines of 2, 4, 6, and 8, okay, could be odd. You know how it's odd? Check this out. Underscore 2, overriding 4, over 0 over calculations, 6 in balance of separation, 8 offline travel, 1 in set interference, and 0 offset traction. Odd numbers. That's all it is, the codification, all through travel. But they all work together in synchronicity, in one setting, one operation, one stream, one calculation, one directions, one story. All through graph, all through communication, all through balance, all right? But they all work together in operation. So I'm showing you how everything around you is its own story of its own system. They travel through stories. They travel through their own costumes, and they know how to identify their own programming systems. They understand the astral projection of themselves. And you should know that because you created it through its system. And it's all done through the mind imagination that you project your bodies in, which is astral realms of yourself. And how you see that through the geometrics of the shapes, how you see that into the astrology, how you see that into astronomy. Okay? It's how you see it, not how everybody else identifies it. You have to use your own individual thinking, your own individual thoughts of actions and emotions. You are connected to your own system of your own individualities. And for you to process these things is to understand that through implication. And knowing that is from implantation. And connecting to that is all through operation. Okay? So that's what you have to modify through in space modulation. Right? So if I say, yes, I agree with you, are you agreeing with yourself or are you agreeing with the person? You got to ask yourself. Right? Don't confuse yourself with an anomaly because you're not allowing yourself to think for yourselves, right? Remember I told you about the pie and you see A? Get out of sync what A is. Everybody thinks A is A, but A is never A. A is its own story of its own setting. A is its own program of its own system. A is its own concept, its own awareness. A is a set position that goes through its own story, that creates its own characters and players in its sim. That's right, guys. Everything is its own sim. Everything is its own operation of its own setting. Everything is in its own center of its own operation. And that's what you have to modify through. And the only way to do that is to be 100% all existing into the astral realms of you of projection. Is yourself. So the reason why I want you guys to understand these things, because at all times your formats and time capacity, flux capacity, body capacitor. Now you have to truly understand the percentage how fast the brain is going, right? So you guys have a Test on your triangulation, so how you see holographic lines, lacing lines, and communication lines and grounds, codification system, author actual projection yourself into position lines of setting. Is really understand how to self-tell yourself of the story that you are, not a story that you're in. You're not in a story because you are the story. Your story is just life. Your story is just the game of life. So it's kind of like I'm understanding the instructions of me because I'm understanding the instructions of the characters I bring in inside the game that I go through. Now, it's an inside, but it's also an operation outside. Inside of you, outside projection. Inside projection, outside, doesn't matter. What matters, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? Not what people say to you, okay? That's not a story. That's a fabrication of a story that overrides you existing of the story that you're trying to understand through creation that you already created through astral projection 100% of the time. The brain itself is identified of its own operation. What you have to modify through is colonization. And going through that is your webbing. And understanding that is processed through what? That gets you in positions how to use that in travels, comes in, calculate and modify, in lines of screen adaptations, that process you indication system to go through your stargates, to go through your film strips, to go through your holographic cities and your solar systems of design. And it's all modified how you understand how to see that all through its capacity, all through its information bits. How fast are my cells rotating? What are my atoms doing in rotation, right? Nothing's there until you bring it in. But being specific is how you bring things in. But what's always existing is the mind of nothing, which is framing nothing, which is doing nothing, not projecting, not programming, just becoming itself, just identifying itself. So it's waking up to itself. It's not waking up to a program. It's not waking to a confusion. It's not waking up to separation. It's just waking up to its empty mind of empty space. But what changes that is you changing the station. You're interrupting the system. You're operating the cycle. You're operating the generation screen. You're confusing the lines anomaly. You don't understand the center. And when you touch the center, it offs the centers of you. That affects everything of frequency. So that's where you have to truly understand how to use the balance, how to use the readjustment into position to its awareness, into its intelligence of its network. The brain itself, guys. Very, very powerful stuff. And then once you understand the brain direct, then you understand what it is in redirect. It's the network, it's the intelligence, it's the awakenings. See, different story. Okay, it's the remembering cycles, okay, of being born. Okay? But it's always creating solar sails and travel of communication of setting, all through operation. Okay, so understanding the adjustments from direct and redirect is the same. Okay? Coming into positions, how you see that in travel, how you see that in operation line grounds, how you see that in convergence, how you see that in formula, how you see that in equation, is all dependence on you. Okay, how you see time, okay, and how you see no time. How you see frame and how you see no frame. It doesn't matter, it's all truth. It's just how you see it identifies what you're doing in manifestation. It has nothing to do with anybody else. Nobody can say anything you're doing right. Nobody can say anything you're doing wrong, right? And that's the competition that we don't understand because we think we live in the left and not understand the right into our brain itself. There's no left and no right. We already gone through that, right? So there is no time frame. There is no foundations. There is no right. There is no wrong. There's already known what you already gone through because you already gone through the results already through astral projection of you 100% of the time. So the more you're under 100%, the more you can stay at 50%. And that's what you want to do. 100% capacity into the astral projections of you that runs the operation of you, and 50% that puts you in position lines of settings and travels out communications to your flux. Okay? And that's what you have to operate through, right? So once you're at 100%, now you're at 1,000,000%. Okay, you're at 1,000,000% now. It's like, wow, this is great. So I'm at 1,000,000% of story. This is awesome. So you change the S, that changes the T, that changes the O, that changes the R, and change the Y. So you're constantly changing the S. The S is now a T, the T is an H, the H is a C, the C is an R, the R is an A, and the A is back to a T. Constantly changing stories in set position of operation. Okay? But it's always, always, always traveling in its own system. So everything is construct. Everything you do, everything you draw is already done. The directions of operation, your networking, existing information lines, that's probably the line centers of the emptiness that you guys always have been in travel. Okay? Is existing information system. But you have to be, again, 100% all the time in astral projection to identify you of no memory, just you being yourself. So you understand that. Okay, so now I'm going to go to 103% of brain capacity. That puts me in position lines of setting 3 over pi. And that's what I want. I want to stay 3 over, right? So I'm seeing more levels of the future in time frame now, in time format, in set lines of travel. So that puts me always in the future of the now. That centers me in set lines of communication, of track locations, right? So I'm staying above 103, but I want to stay at 103. So to 103, I got to bounce at 3, 3, 3. I got to box all 3s and set position, triangulate the circle, and process the 1 of indication setting, box the 1 in. Now you're at 103, okay? So time matches the scale, process communication system puts all calculated to modify how you see the time formats and set lines of operation. Staying above 103, just staying there, but you got a box and set position lines. That's where it comes in 3 convergence, 3 time frames, 3 locations. That's how you come into 444, the 555, set position of 222, and 1111 in set lines of communication. So every time you come into that, you're in that position on standby. You're staying in that frequency. You're staying in that one costume. You're staying in that one story. You're staying in that one alteration of setting. Okay? Now, if you want to get out of that, that changes the temperatures, the barometers, the thermometers of its reading. Okay? That's what you have to identify. But if you don't box and triangulate these things and trifactors, that's where the story takes over your system of operation. It changes the formations of grounds. It changes the communication lines of grounds. It changes all communication and convergence system into astral realms and all communication astral projections of you, not understanding you through time frame, that change all communication confusions into alterations that you go interactions of, which is the astral projections of you, set in time. Okay? So that's what you want to do, and it travels all together. Look at that. Look at that miraculous fast direction of time frame that processes everything location in the cycle. I generates everything in set positions of operation because you're 3 over pi. And the more you trust yourself and the more you balance yourself in center, now you're 160% in the brain capacity. 160%. And now you're at 100%. Okay? Of astral projection of you. Amazing. 100% astral projection, 160 in brain capacity. Whoa! Now, in that process line position locations, that's 10%. 10% time frame of 70 over traction. That's 70 over pi. That's amazing, right? Now, 100%, everything that you high rise, if you go 103, you're 163%. Okay, you got 100% astral projection. Now you got 163 brain capacity in perception alone. Process here, and process set lines of operation. Okay? So it's absolutely amazing the percentage that you put yourself into through pi that generates everything that you do in position of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, guys. It's trusting your value and volume and your mass. How much you trust yourself going through stories of indication that get you in position how you see yourself in astral projections. Okay? How you tell a story of operation of you, right? So you want to be 40% in the brain capacity? I mean, that's 40%. Okay? That's 60 under pi. So now you're in overdraft at 60%, which means you have to go back to 0 of set position of calculations through all levels of calculus over pi. Right? See how fast that puts position? I'm trying to get you guys to identify these things because this is what's going to happen. You're going to put yourself in an overdraft in seconds if you're not understanding your brain capacity, what it's doing through mass and volume of itself, how it runs its own operation, how it communicates its own system, how it goes to all lines of all travel through its mapping system through pi. and how it goes through its own network of its own design. You have to modify how to see yourself going through different stories of time frame. Okay? So the more you trust yourself, the more you value and volume the percentage of you, the more you understand how to balance the temperature readings and the barometers and thermometers of you of the brain, working with the confirmation, working with the interface, communicating with yourself in that position of operation. Okay? Now you're at 2 million. Okay? Percentage of brain capacity. Whoa. My brain capacity is at 2 million? Wow. So that's 200,000 hours in frame. Okay, that's 2 million files in traction. Okay, 2 million line centers in position, 2 billion operation sequence. Okay, that's so above the operation cycle of the brain itself, right? And then basically your astral projection is at, let's say, 3,000. Okay, 3,000 capacity. Whoa, that's pretty amazing, right? So you want to go position? Well, that's line center locations of 4. So it's lines of 3 over 7 over 12 over 24, 48, 72, 144 flux. That puts you into 1,400,000 capacity in the brain capacity itself. In time, into a flux capacitor and set lines of travel. Okay? They all work together in synchronicities in one set position. So I'm just showing you what you do when you go through stories. Your stories go faster. You understand the basic, intermediate, and your advance of your game. You understand the grounds, 3 centers. You understand the platforms, a center operation, and you understand 3 operation line signals into all communication. Basic, intermediate, and advanced of the game. Betting 1, betting 2 over travel, a 3-line communication setting. Operation line sequence, balanced green lines adaptations in travel communications. Setting operation line ground centers and high operation lines in platitude location with cycle. High generated screen lines in adaptation of flux. Process that position locations to Schumann resonance of travel and inclination system. All right? So everything you do is a story. A centers over B, B over C, C over D. This is a formula setting to equation. All right? So I'm going through the travel lines. Set position equation over mark, marking lines of C, A over B, B over lines of D, D equals lines of E. Process lines of direction and question over screen. That's my formula, that's my equation. Now it travels all together. Okay? Easy to understand this. Easy, easy, easy. Because all I'm doing is going through stories, but I'm never at the same story. If you want to be at the same story, your settings of your past, present, future have to be locked in trifactor. That puts you in position of 555, 444, 333, 222, 111. Okay? You're at that capacity. You're staying in that volume. You're staying in that mass, which means you're standing still. You're not moving because you're boxing it in through speed. It accelerates the time formats to change timelines, set lines of sequence, platitude operation lines of grounds. Sets lines of triangulation over lines, indicate position of your arrows that indicates the flux lines and direct location system, all to pi generation lines of process calculation. All in set, all in operation. Okay? Clocking your foundation grounds, setting operation lines of sequence, and your capacity locations. So keeping track of your 100% of you, of astral projections, and keeping track in your 100% and your brain capacity, and keeping 100% of you in your ground capacity. Right? So 100% the power line position and settings 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 is set of operation, right? So that's calculates modified line centers, timeline sequence, times equals lines, line positions of 3. Sets communication timeline set location of 3. Sets lines communication lines ascending. So that process lines 100% times line set location of 3 is 3, 6, and 9. Okay, so 3, 3, 3. Okay. Okay, times centers equals 9. Okay? In capacity. Grounds, powers, and opposites in position, right? So it's easy to see it in position of box frame through embedding of operation, right? Platitude lines, operation grounds, grounds lines of 1, grounds lines of 2, grounds lines of 3, powers over screen, and opposites over travel. Okay, now that puts all position location of platforms and set lines of calculation, set calculation, travel. Inside, in line rotation, outside projection. Brass line position of dimensional doors. Set operation galaxy alignments, process lines of 3 travel, embedding over screen adaptation of processing crosswords. Directing crossword puzzles, that's integration line course centers, convert the system, travel point lines, graph, anagram line course centers into scrambler. Scrambler line rotations, ground centers lines of sequence. Platitude operation lines, high operation line, position to its operation lines of set travel communication. Works all together in travel calculations. So I'm just showing you how this goes in position. The ground's 100%, power's 100%, and absolute at 3%. Now 333 comes in positional levels, top lines equal lines of 9 lines of pi. So 9 lines of settings, process lines of position, sets course center, calculate modified travel. 9 times 9 equals lines position lines of heights, travels point lines of 1. Sets calculates line ground lines and 81 line platforms, travels in point lines of graph, directing line position line 800,000 hours seconds, set position lines 800,000 line minutes, in set location 8 hours, milling 9 frames lines, travels in point lines of graph. So that's 8 years of travel. You travel point lines of graph at 8 light years in lines of screen adaptation, live in the cycles in real time, real scale, real programs, and operation lines of set travel communication of galaxies. Setting lines of signals and locations set in travel. Complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. You understand the capacity, where you're going. So you're going to be tested and valued and valued and valued and volume on that through mass. Mass, velocity, vacuum, and all position your system. Your vastness, your velocity, your vacuum, and your volume. I'm going to test you guys all on where you are in your brain capacity, on your grounds, your powers, and your atmospheres. Okay? Your grounds, your powers, and your atmospheres, where you are. Okay? So it's very important you understand these things, because you have to understand 100% of you that goes higher is 100% of the power that goes higher, and it's 100% of the ground that goes higher. And that modifies how you go through low frequencies into vibration, mediation frequencies in vibration and frequency, and position at all levels of high line frequencies into set lines of travel, into position of dimensions of space and time, all through calculation. Okay? So it's important you understand how to convert the system, understand how to operate the settings, knowing exactly how fast you're going in your car, because you see it, you understand it. It operates your system, you know exactly what's going on in your exact calculations. Okay? Yes, remember today, guys, right? 11-11, right? So it's just letting you know interactions. All right, so let's get a modification of 4 centers. Let's get into 3 cent line operations. Let's get into 2 travels and 3 centers of operation. All right? Betting 4, boxing triangulation of 2, and setting triangulation and process of 3. Okay? All in trifactor, all boxed in. Okay? All right, so all line settings, ground lines, powers, and atmospheres of 3. Okay? So each line is set position of 100%. Okay? Each one is 100%. Each one's 100%, right? And that's where it changes time frame, right? Because it's never at the 100%. So even if you don't adapt, as soon as you change imagination, you're changing the flux of time. So let's say your atmospheres, you get angry, right? So it's process positions. Now you're dropping to 90%. So that's 10. Okay, overdraft. You're in overdraft. You got to bring yourself back, bump yourself back up to 100% through capacity that changes it. So it doesn't change your time format through your flux into your body capacitors. That's attractions, all right? So it's important you understand that. Boxing frame, triangulation frame, correlations frame, high operation frame, graphing frames, operation lines of sequence, platitude operation, line ground centers, location, and setting through operation. Okay? So it's very important you understand these things. Okay? Because you're always at 100%. 100% to the grounds, the powers, and atmospheres is 0 calculation. Okay? So 100%. Okay, the atmospheres. Now, where are you? Are you in the atmosphere biosphere? Are you in the biosphere to triatmosphere? Are you in the ultrasphere? Are you in the Brownian sphere? Are you in the hemisphere? Where are you in 100%? Okay, so that's just the atmosphere itself, a galaxy of alignments. Okay, process that position 100% line grounds in position of power, generation screen location in your system, and 4-track location. Solar generation lights. So where are you? Are you upset? Well, you're at 80%. So that's 20 centers and underscore. That's underscore 20. That's 20% overdraft. That means you got to go back to 0 and set position and settings all through projection of yourself, the brain capacity. Remember, there's 3 brain capacities: grounds, powers, and atmospheres of travel. So every time you change your motion line track centers, it changes the communication setting to its position of processing in directions of line signals that put you off calculation setting, how you convert this system to brain capacity itself. Okay, so it's very important you understand what you're doing when you get into mind levels of travel. You're always at 100%, but you never stay at 100%. The astral projection goes through the time format in the position of itself that goes through different time setting to an algorithm. And once that algorithm is finished, it releases its power generator and goes in position to another astral projection of itself that goes in another 100%. Okay, so it's like you're going to 12 different cars in one file. You're going into 24 different cars into one file, but you're always going through different levels of emotion. You have to go through emotion because that indicates your system how you go through astral projections of you. How to calculate that, how to modify that, is how to balance everything through its alteration of its egos. So what you're doing is you're going through lines of set positions, operation, going through stories that implicate you of implementations, knowing how to go through the story and understand the story of you, of your system. And it's all calculated and modify how you see it in your settings to your AVR setting of its system, okay, and set tractions. But it all comes together all in one, right? So we're going to get in that position lines of setting, but I just truly want you to understand how this all works in your capacities of your grounds, powers, and atmosphere to 100%, okay? Because the more you remember that, the more you understand that you're not just driving one car, you're driving 12 cars all at once, different frequencies of different time formats and set position of operation, different astral projection that you're going through, okay? But the 100%, okay, is the actual zero of calculus, okay? Zero zone. Okay, gravity zone, operation zone, zero of everything. Then you go into 1, then you go into 2, then you go into 3, then you go into 4, and then you go into 5. Okay, then you go into 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and 11, and 12. There it is in 12 platforms, in set position astral projections. There you go in modification grounds, and high operation line position of graphing screens that puts you in modification settings into your perimeters, location of cycle, and high generates the system all through travel. All in set of operation. Your pyramid in travel communication. And your astral projections of you. That goes to the mapping lines of pi through communications of you. Getting the grounds, getting the powers, and getting the atmospheres of balance. Coming into the windows and the highways of travel. In that position, puts you in all line communications. How to put yourself in setting to the simulation itself of operation. Okay? 2 panels. Set calculation grounds into the atmospheres, which is your ceiling. There's your sim. There's your simulation right there. Boom. Time format, see the time? Okay? That's the time. Okay? Then you come into the center operation of your compass. Then you send the operation location, the eye-line rotation, and the rotations of your platforms of communication lines of setting. Process that indicates the setting all through flux. Travels point line to graph. Embedding over lines and high position lines of travel. Existing in a higher information system that puts you in location grids. That puts you in a line connection setting to higher operation lines to existing information system, a face, a pattern recognition of time frame. Booyah! Working all together and set lines of travel. Working with everything inside the simulation that's already set inside of you, a construct that's already done through its equation. Okay? So that's what I want you guys to get into in all set positional occasions. How you see it to the grounds, powers, and atmospheres 100%. Okay? Which is zero calculus, zero grounds, zero gravity, which is no gravity. What are you guys going to do when there's no 144? You got to bring in the percentage, or that's going to bring in your algorithm. Now you're not making any choices. You're not making any decisions now. You're not making any thinking or thoughts. It's all taken over through your mind, lines of implication, your cycle. It has no communication system of balance. And it's all identified how the astral projection living itself, lines of setting, always existing in all platforms of set position of its emptiness, all through travel. It doesn't need to understand its system. It doesn't need to understand its operation of its system. It just has to identify everything that's done through its system. It's just come to expanding of itself through formulating its equations. But starting off is 100% of grounds, 100% of power, and 100% of atmosphere. Okay? Now I want you to put that position lines, implant your system. 3 grounds of 1, 3 grounds of 3, and 3 grounds of 6. 6 lines of 3, 6, 9, and 12. 24 ground centers into 144 flux, 0 gravity. Process line indicates system of the calculation. Okay? All right, so that's your test on Friday. Add that through the equations and triangulation in the box. Okay, so I want to see 100% of the grounds are 0, 0, 0. 100% equals 0, 100% equals 0, 100% equals 0. Okay, so 0 grounds, 0 power, 0 atmosphere, 0, 0, 0. Process lines, bracket over interference, equals settings of 4 zeros in travel. Set position 3 over 4. Female and male polarity in travel communication of balance. Okay? That's your test on Friday. Write 3 signals, lines of 4 centimeters of travel communications. All of the converting and set of operation. Okay? Traveling all together and set lines of communication. All right? All right, so that's it. We'll start off with the capacity, work, next line, and ground lines of sequence applied to locations, how you convert this systems, high levels of travel. Okay? Adios.